as you know again, and recently I got a request to show some of my techniques when I'm doing vocal processing. So this lesson is going to be on little tricks I use when I'm mixing vocals, and I'm going to try to kind of keep it more of a general tutorial or a general guide on what you want to do with vocals, because there are many different types of vocals out there, and you need to treat each one special in its own way. Also, if you could check out my own productions, I'm going to leave the link in the description box, and I would really appreciate it if you could check that out. To begin with, you want your vocals to really sit out on top of a mix. They generally tend to be the more important parts of your mix, and as such, they should really stick out. I personally like to start with the vocals and compose around them, simply because it's a lot easier to mix. You're not going to be stepping on your vocals with, say some kind of synth that you're creating. If anything, it should be the other way around, and ideally you don't want that to happen at all, but you want to minimize that type of stuff, and that'll generally give you a good mix. So let me show you what we're beginning with. This is a remix I did of Leave the Lights On by Mako. Go check her out. She's got a lot of good stuff. It's kind of a progressive house remix I did here. Here's the vocals, completely dry, no reverb, no compression or anything like that.
Secret, and that I gotta keep it, but I want the lights on, yeah, I want the lights on, and I don't wanna run away anymore. Leave the lights on, leave the lights on, leave the light. That it's a secret, and that I gotta keep it, but I want the lights on, yeah, I want the lights on, and I don't wanna run.
Okay, so hopefully you get kind of a sense of how the original vocal sample sounds. And the first thing I listen to when I do pretty much any kind of vocals is if there's a lot of S sounds. And this is pretty common. You want to listen for parts of a section that need to be de-essed. That's what's called, is de-essing. And it's essentially a de-esser is a compressor that reacts to a certain frequency range. So say for instance the S's are in the 10,000 hertz range, like they are with this sample or this vocal track here. The sense in this plugin I'm using, called Spitfish, is similar to the ratio, and the depth is similar to the threshold on a regular compressor. Soft just refers to the knee, and listen is sort of like a delta monitor. Alright, and Spitfish is a pretty neat bundle from Digital Fish Phones, or it's part of the bundle, and they got a lot of quality compressors and different VSTs. They're all free on their website, so definitely worth checking out. I might leave the link in the description for you. So anyways, the way I check for where a nasty S sound is I simply get the parametric EQ and sweep a boosted frequency. So I'll show you here.
Secret, and that I gotta keep it, but I want the lights on, yeah, I want the lights on, and I don't wanna run away anymore. Leave the lights on, leave the lights on, leave the...
So if you notice, there's generally a constant activity up here in the 10K range, and every time we boost up there, there's just a really nasty resonance. So that's where we found our S. So that's what I set the Spitfish for, which is the de-esser for 10 hertz or 10,000 hertz. Sorry, a kind of a medium threshold and a very light ratio. I'm not trying to completely overkill the S sounds, because it will sound a bit unnatural if you do that. but I just wanted to kind of calm it out a little bit, and I'll show you what it's doing. By hitting listen, the Delta monitor, it essentially shows you what's being compressed. So check it out. That's what's being taken out of the music, or of the vocal. So here is the before and after.
Secret, and that I gotta keep it, but I want the lights on. Yeah, I want the lights on, and I don't want.
So it's very subtle. You don't, hear it too much. If you ever play it back on a big system, though, these sort of imbalances tend to get a little bit more exaggerated, and any little tiny correction at this level, no matter how small, is always a good thing. So that's sort of my philosophy on it. Another thing I do on vocals is I will then go on to compress after I've found any annoying S's. And on this one, I use the TRD feedback compressor, which is based on feedback and RMS levels as opposed to feed forward and peak levels. Just kind of a different approach to compression than the standard compressor that most people are used to. Very smooth. I like it, and after trying it out on this song along with a couple other compressors, I really like the way it sounded on the vocals. So I'll show you kind of what I did here.
Secret, and that I gotta keep it, but I want the lights on. Yeah, I want the lights on.
So I didn't do a ton of compression here. I mean, you see it goes down to -6 at times. But it's sort of like a constant compressing, but the main part of it is it's not a super low threshold, but the knee is pretty wide. It's a 10 decibel knee, and that's just because I really like the way it kind of I just like the way it sounded. Sometimes you can experiment with different knees, and sometimes there's vocals with a certain dynamic range that you are aiming for with the compression. Sometimes there's just something you might experiment with, and you might find that one knee sounds better than another, but it just takes a little bit of experimenting to get over to find a good knee for your compression. But that's not the most important part. Most important part is obviously your ratio and threshold, and that you find a good release and attack time. For this one, I didn't want it to be very punchy or sudden. I just wanted it to kind of be constant, so I had a sort of medium fast release and sort of a fast-ish attack. But the release slow, which reacts more to constant levels above the threshold, I set to more of a tamer level. In fact, I might tame this one back a little bit. I added a little bit of color over here, and then I made up the gain over here, simply to make it a little bit louder, and again put it on top of the mix. The element that really puts the vocals on top of the mix is probably the compression. Just kind of my experience. Another thing I want to do when I'm doing vocals is I want to get rid of any unnecessary bass material. You don't really want any sub frequencies in your vocals, and I do this on pretty much all of my vocal tracks that I've mixed. Depends on the source, but since she's pretty high up in the frequency range, she wasn't even really touching anything below 100, much less sub frequencies. So I just did a high pass right here, since there was some little bit of noise kind of creeping through down there. Alright, and then I used a Waves plugin, the Puigtech, in mono, since we want vocals to be in mono to, again, kind of separate it from the rest of the mix. I didn't do too much. I think I just added a little bit of top end now that I think about it. I don't want to have to load it again. Then finally, I added a few more harmonics with the Ozone Exciter, one of my favorite plugins again, Ozone. I just wanted to add just a little bit more warmth. I use the dual triode algorithm, which simulates a 12AX7 preamp tube, which I like to emulate a lot. That's another thing I like to do with most all of my vocal tracks, is I like to add something that kind of gives the impression that you're using a really high-end preamplifier. Even though I haven't tracked it or I didn't record it, I still think it falls on my responsibility to, kind of convey that, since I have some of those tools. And if you don't have a ton of money sitting around and you don't really want to buy iZotope, there's also this freeware one called Xtube, which will excite your source material. It's a saturator. Kind of the description says it simulates a 12AX7 preamp. It does a pretty decent job, I'd have to say. It's got a lot of simple features, up to 16 times oversampling. You could use it in stereo, mono, surround sound. Pretty versatile. Definitely worth checking out since it's free. I still use it, even sometimes over Ozone's Exciter, so that should tell you something, I guess. Just depends on what I'm feeling. Another thing I did to make the vocals kind of stand out in the mix is anytime I had a lot of stuff going on around the vocals, I would sidechain the vocals to that track, and I would compress it then using sidechain compression. An example of this is this glitched vocal that I made myself. What it is a recording of the main vocals with reverb on them, and then flipped backwards. And I thought it was a really cool effect that I created. Check it out. Oops. There we go. Okay, since it's going to be taking up the same frequency space as the vocals, since they are kind of essentially the same thing, just kind of messed around with the kind of, I don't know, atmosphere of it. I need some way to kind of separate the two. So, like I said, sidechained the main vocals to the glitched vocals, and compressed it. So basically, whenever the main vocals goes over a certain level threshold that I set, the glitched vocals will actually be reduced in volume. So it's kind of like an interesting bit of compression there for those of you who've never used sidechain compression. I also do that a lot with other instruments. When I want the kick to come through, I'll put it on like a synth or a bass or something, and it just makes the kick really stand out, which is always a good thing, at least in the genres I do. So yeah, I just like to really make the vocals pop out quite a bit, filter out any sub information that I don't use, kind of take out any annoying S's, kind of EQ it to taste, and then mix around it, sidechain, cut some frequencies that might be really used a lot in the main vocals. I might cut the frequencies in on another channel, on a synth perhaps, or on a bass that is kind of conflicting with it, in order for the vocals again to stand out above everything else. And then another thing I did is I added reverb to the main vocals. I will show you what I mean.
Secret and that gotta keep it, but I want the lights on. Yeah, I want the lights on, and I don't wanna run away anymore. Leave the lights on, leave the lights on.
And pretty much the final advice I can give you about adding reverb or delay to your vocals is don't worry too much about the effect as much, because you can always, tinker around with the knobs and adjust it while the mix is being played. But just make sure that your delays, if you're using any delays, are in time with the song. Just makes it sound that much better, that much more clean. It doesn't feel really haphazard or anything. It just feels like it's really synced up and good to go. What else? I was going to show something else. No, I guess that's about it. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you could check out my other productions, I'd appreciate it. If you have any questions, hit me up, leave a message or a comment, and I will do my best to answer. And don't be afraid to hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.